Hello, everybody. Welcome to day 2 of KaijuCon Live with the very first panel with us, the lovely Gargantucast crew, with me and Cole. And you can see our beautiful faces for once, not just audio form.
I think lovely is a strong word.
No, it's too weak. It's not strong. It's weak. It's I am Chris. I am the co-host of Gargantucast, as well as a writer for Something Ghoulish, our parent network. And this is...
I'm Cole. I'm the guy who keeps locked in the dungeon until it's time to record.
And you write every now and then.
Every now and then. When you let me out to have when you let me out to have a Pop-Tart.
No, the Phantom lets you out. All right. And we are joined by some lovely people. Would you guys like to introduce yourselves to the lovely masses?
Everyone's lovely today.
Faye. I write for Something Ghoulish. I am basically one of the Kaiju writers, I feel like, at this point.
Yeah, and your writing is fantastic. Honestly,
thanks.
especially your King of the Monsters piece.
Thank you.
I'm Jake. I've been a high school teacher for about 13 years now. And over the summer, I started writing for Something Ghoulish. I write about horror, mostly with some kaiju mixed in.
Yeah, you wrote us a really good Space Amoeba piece for the 50th anniversary.
Yeah, I did. I was looking at Space Amoeba, which really isn't that remarkable a film itself, although I really like the kaiju. Ghidorah is probably one of my favorite kaiju
Like a minute
overall.
in and people are already throwing takes.
Yeah.
But,
I do like Gezra. He's much more interesting than that one. I think it's Odaku, the giant octopus.
Yeah, well, the giant octopus, it's literally just a giant octopus.
Yeah.
But he's
That's Tsuburaya 8.
He's a little more personality there with Ghidorah. And plus, he was in the Godzilla NES game. He was like one of the first monsters you fought.
And Kingdom of Rulers of Earth in the comic.
Oh, yeah, he's got a lot. He shows up in a lot of that first half of Rulers of Earth.
And we have another person to introduce. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I am Victoria. I am also a writer over at Ghoulish. I mostly write about horror films from I guess I'm known as being the feminist perspective of the channel. But also over on YouTube, I do a show called The Horror Academic where I review classic horror films.
Awesome. And if you guys want to check out all these lovely guys and gals' writings, be sure to check out Something Ghoulish. So,
Chris, I think I'm getting you a thesaurus for your next birthday.
Thank you.
We can't all be lovely. What's wrong with that, Chris?
Fantastic.
Well, if anyone's lovely, I would love to thank our lovely people in the chat. I'm seeing some
chat.
Some awesome positivity. People excited to be here. Good to have you here.
And let's get this show on the road. So
I raise my Gatorade to all of you.
So our panel is based off a segment on our show called Is This a Kaiju, where we debate about, usually for fun, on whether or not insert giant fictional characters a kaiju. But when I was thinking for a panel to submit for the show, we were given an idea of, let's actually dive into what really makes a kaiju, because people joke about is Clifford the Big Red Dog a kaiju, or is the Jolly Green Giant a kaiju? But then you get into gray territory, like is King Kong a kaiju? Is the Radosaur from Ray Harryhausen's Beast in 2011 Fathom a kaiju? Are the dinosaurs from Jurassic Park kaiju? And it goes back into just whether or not kaiju is inherently something that's Japanese, or has the word easily been adopted by a global audience. But first, a little history for you guys. So if most of the people at this point know, kaiju loosely translate to strange beast. It's been a misconception for those new in the genre, it means giant monster. Not really. It means strange beast.
It started as just strange beast, but it became more of a colloquial thing that it just means giant monster. It just that's the name it got stapled with. So people kind of just, a kaiju movie is a Godzilla movie. Therefore, all movies that are described as kaiju films have to have a giant monster.
Yeah, and the first recorded use of the word was in the 4th century BC in a Chinese text titled classic of mountains and seas to describe basically mythical creatures in various mythologies in China. And that book was later adopted by Japan, because especially during the 19th century when Sakoku, or the closed country policy, because for a long time Japan was very isolationist throughout most of its history until the 19th century. And when that word got adopted, it basically became a word to describe any mythical creatures or even paleontology. Like when,
there you go, people. Loch Ness Monster's a kaiju confirmed.
Yeah, or yeah, or like even dinosaurs are described as kaiju in Japanese paleontology. But the weird thing is, go ahead, Faye.
The interesting thing with dinosaurs and kaiju specifically is the earliest one of the earliest use of the word kaiju was to describe sightings of dinosaurs, like cryptozoological sightings.
Like finding dinosaur bones?
No, like Loch Ness Monster, living dinosaur cryptids
type stuff. But then, though, from what I've seen, the terms kind of died out, and there's another term for dinosaurs now in Japanese, as kaiju's kind of shifted. I think it's. I need to look this up now because there's a very specific term for them in Japanese.
No, of course. And what's funny is if you actually look at mythology, kaiju was more of a general term. It's just like saying, "Oh, this is just a monster." But there's no kaiju-like creature in Japanese mythology. The closest you can think of is Orochi, or that. Cole, what's the name of that giant catfish?
Oh, I don't know its name off the top of my head, but yeah, in Japanese folklore, there is a gigantic catfish that when it gets pissed off, it flails around and causes earthquakes.
Yeah. But for the most part, like most creatures are described in Japanese mythologies is yokai, or onis, or even just gods like kamis. And it wasn't like kaiju basically became more used in pop culture. In fact, the first use of it in pop culture is the Japanese title for Beasts of 20,000 Fathoms, which was Genshi Kaiju ga Araru, or which basically literally translates to an atomic kaiju appears. And what's funny is Beasts of 20,000 Fathoms takes that word because it is one of the main inspirations for Godzilla or Gojira when it was first released in 1954. Like Tomonuki Tanaka has said, his two main inspirations for the film is King Kong and Beasts of 20,000 Fathoms. And because of that, kaiju basically been adopted for Gojira from here on onwards. But the thing is, kaiju actually has very subcategories. So Godzilla will be described as a dai kaiju. That's more like a term for giant monsters, And then there's interesting areas. You got kaijin, which is villains, like monsters for like Kamen Rider and Super Sentai. They're like more human sized. They can grow big, but they're like usually like intelligent enough where they're basically like monstrous supervillains. And then you have Seijins, which is like a lot of the aliens in the Ultraman series, like Alien Baltan and Zeton and all that stuff. It is interesting. Like there's even like these terms, but then there's stuff like, okay, so what's King Ghidorah? Is he a kaiju or a Seijin? Or Gigan?
Is it possible to be both?
That is a good question. Can they be both? Because there's Alien Zeton, and then there's just Zeton himself. The actual giant creature at the end of the original Ultraman series.
I just wanted to point out, we got someone in the chat, Mazer Patrol brings up that the Kai and Kaiju and the Kai and Yokai use the same kanji.
That is true.
So
that's cool.
Closer connection than before. Yeah, I'm very uninformed about the Japanese language.
There was also someone in the comments pointed out that it's Namazu is the catfish we're talking about.
Namazu.
King. Yep.
It's good we have some people in the chat. Thank you, Dan, filling in our gaps.
So that's a little bit of a history / diving into the different subcategories of kaiju. So let's still talk about what makes a kaiju. One thing a lot of people point out, like if it has to be Japanese, it's like the whole, like I feel like the closest thing we can do for this debate is the debate on what is anime. For example, another Japanese.
I was about to mention that.
Yeah, a lot of people say like, anime has to be strictly Japanese animation, but going to Japan, anime just describes all animation. Same with kaiju. Kaiju in Japanese language describes all monsters for the most part. But a lot of people say like just strictly the genre as well as these characters are more like Japanese. Like Godzilla is a kaiju, obviously, but Kong, like a lot of people debate like Kong's not a kaiju, but you could actually say he is because two of the earliest giant monster films in Japan are King Kong films. One is Go ahead, Faye.
It's okay, Chris. I hate to cut you off with the King Kong stuff, but I actually did recently find out because I was talking to somebody who has some materials on that. Mm-hmm. Those two Kong films were not giant monster films.
Really?
One of the two King Kong films doesn't have King Kong in it at all. It has somebody dressing up as King Kong. Okay. And it was kind of like a comedy, because of how big the King Kong re-release was. And the other King Kong film had him as a human-sized monster.
Okay. Though what was in the poster and promo art, he was holding a woman.
Yeah, apparently that was just for the poster from what I heard.
Okay. I mean, the thing is, these films are lost, so details
on that too.
So because these films are lost, we don't know 100%. We just got more details as the years go on, but until we actually find those film reels, and probably not because, these films were released during World War II. So probably not, but still, like, even then, like, think about the inspirations. Godzilla wouldn't be here without King Kong, without Beasts and 20th Falcons. Yeah. And hell, King Kong wouldn't exist without debatably what is the earliest Rampage monster movie, the original Lost World, back in 1925. Which, the film ends with a brontosaur going on a rampage, which is probably like the first time you see some giant creature attacking the city. So, like, what do you guys think? Like, do you feel like Kaiju is, I don't want to say culturally appropriated, but words mutate over time with pop culture, especially with how the world has been globalized as, has gone on, because, things change over time. Words are weird. Words mutate. And, things like words have different meanings as, decades go on when humans communicate with each other. So I'll go through everybody's thoughts on it and, give their takes on it. Basically like a roundtable discussion. So Cole, what do you think?
I've been seeing, like, you say that there's people arguing about it, but mostly I was reading the chat while you were talking. It looks like almost most everybody's in agreement that even if Kong wasn't considered a kaiju before, then we had Godzilla versus Kong, where
the Toho films,
him and Godzilla are basically the same height. So if he wasn't a kaiju before, he is now.
There's King Kong Escapes as well that gave us Mechanic Kong and Gorosaurs, which will appear later on. And now he's going to fight Godzilla again next year, hopefully.
So, yeah, I'd say, like, to address the first question you brought up, do kaiju have to inherently be Japanese? I think as long as you're still following the same kind of structure and tropes of the genre of kaiju filmmaking, I think even if you're American, Brazilian, any country, as long as you're following the same kind of like narrative aspects, it's a kaiju movie.
Mm-hmm. And it's also just I think the reason why the word is so like kind of debated is just kaiju films are not. It's not that I don't want to say simple, but there is an easy guideline to it. Like at the end of the day, most Godzilla films, Godzilla is either wrecking stuff or he's stopping another monster from wrecking stuff. And with that, it's just like, you got stuff like, Kong, going on Rampage. And then there's like more wishy-washy stuff, like, creatures that are like Jaws, the shark from Jaws. Like it's a B movie, it's a monster movie, but at the end of the day, it's just an abnormally big shark.
I remember me and Chris when we got into the conversation of Kong being a kaiju, we discussed the sheer concept of an animal that's far larger than it normally is supposed to be. Does that count? And we said, we kind of agreed that the main line that has to be drawn in order to make the distinction of kaiju or not is, does it act like its real life counterpart? Because Kong doesn't act like a normal gorilla. He's much smarter, he's more articulate, and even he's much more aggressive in a fighter, because a lot more gorillas are more territorial. They fight when they feel threatened, and that's really the only time. Otherwise, they're kind of shy creatures. They only fight when they genuinely feel like they might die.
Yeah, and I'm glad David proves every monster has a country from Mystery Science Theater. Thank you.
It's not a kaiju panel without an MST3K reference.
Yeah, and Cole, you brought up a good point with the idea abnormal, like the shark from Jaws. It's just a big shark. It's not even like.
It's a very aggressive, very hungry shark, but still a shark.
It's still a shark, and even or like the crocodile from Lake Placid. It's an abnormally big crocodile, but it's just a crocodile. But you have stuff like dinosaurs, like because paleontology is not a refined science. You have outdated.
How dare you?
I mean, we've discovered new stuff every day at this point. You know, like you got the Jurassic Park dinosaurs are like nothing like real dinosaurs. They're not even like, even in the films they're described as they're not even real dinosaurs. So are they considered kaiju because they're basically like mutant, like hybrid creatures and stuff like that. Like, you know, you got, you know, kaiju that are just mutated or abnormal dinosaurs. Like Anguirus is a dinosaur. Godzilla in the Heisei films is a mutated dinosaur.
The Godzillasaurus.
A Godzillasaurus. So do they count as kaiju? And yeah,
it's a very flexible term.
It is very flexible. And I also think like someone pointed out in the chat, like, do we need a new term for kaiju? I just feel like giant monster kind of adds like this generic kind of thing, but if you say like, oh, this is a kaiju film, it adds like a little bit of, you know, importance to it. Hell, like giant monster, like we're not the giant monster fandom, we're the kaiju fandom. It adds like this unique take to this. Faye, you got any thoughts?
See, I think the thing is though, is that like whenever people try to say, oh, like for example, Kong and Rhedosaurus aren't kaiju, I think it's a little bit odd just because they define the genre so much. Like you were mentioning earlier, you literally cannot have Godzilla without Kong or the Rhedosaurus. So like even if it's changed to a degree, I still feel like you have to consider them kaiju just because that they were the inspiration point. And like, yeah, sure, you have stuff like Jaws and such, but I feel like even with Jurassic Park, those are more killer animal movies, which is its own subgenre of horror and science fiction.
No, yeah, I totally agree. You know, we already have the killer animal movie, which is like a weird subcategory in its own right.
Yeah.
And
no,
go ahead.
Although then I was gonna say, but you do get some weird like mixes of that, like stuff like Them or Night of the Lepus.
Oh yeah, it's not a giant monster panel without or some people point out you got stuff like Kumonga and Kamacuras, which are just giant spiders and giant praying mantises. Mothra, like, you know, in the first film, yeah, it was a creature. It was like how Kong was worshipped as a god, but the Bailey was a god. But as the film progressed, you know, Mothra is flat out a goddess at this point. But yeah, you know, just giant bugs, you know, or like Tarantula and Them. You know, the idea of, you know, big bugs. Do they count as giant monsters? Like all they are is just big bugs.
Yeah.
Jake, what are your thoughts?
Well, you know, as far as King Kong goes, I think King Kong definitely has to be a kaiju. I mean, just, you know, by what Cole said, like he's not just a gorilla blown up. He has a personality to him. They can act through Willis O'Brien's able to act through the stop motion. And something like, and to me, like, is it a Japanese term or only Japanese monsters kaiju? I think that a lot of that has to do with how Japanese monsters were brought to life. When you have, like, I think that Jurassic Park, I don't really think of that. I agree. It's not really a kaiju movie, but The Legend of the Dinosaurs and Monster Birds, which is a great funky 70s kaiju movie, which is just really dinosaurs. I think those are definitely kaiju. And a lot of what makes them kaiju is just that they're people in suits and puppets.
Yeah, that's true.
To me, like, there's a certain physicality to it. And Kamacuras, I'll use two examples for Kamacuras and Kumonga. Like, I don't really know if I would think of the Universal movies like The Deadly Mantis or Tarantula as kaiju movies, just because, you know, going back to that definition that Cole put out, like, they're just big bugs. Literally big bugs. Like, there's a part in The Deadly Mantis where they just have like a little Washington monument and they put a real praying mantis on it. They like throw it on there. And whereas Kamacuras is not a normal praying mantis. For one thing, he's like sort of that salmon colored and he's got that weird looking mouth and he moves like he's a big marionette. So to me, a lot of that is like a kaiju. They have that little extra bit of personality. They're not just blown up. They're not just a dinosaur. And to me, the Japanese, just because of their design aesthetics and how they would bring things to life through puppetry and suitimation, kind of lends them to be kaiju. But there's plenty of other American monsters and European monsters like Gorgo and Reptilicus that would also fit that kaiju definition.
Mm-hmm. And there's probably the big elephant in the room that is Pacific Rim, because that basically revitalized the genre, which, even though it's not a Japanese film, it's heavily inspired by that. So they probably get they're considered kaiju just for how much it respects the genre. And it's just
I think they are kaiju. I don't think you can make any other argument that they're not.
What else would you call them?
Yeah, the film calls them kaiju.
I would actually give credit to revitalizing the genre to The Host and Cloverfield.
Oh, The Host is beautiful.
I think those are the ones that did.
Yeah, like that. And South Korea basically had its own subcategory of giant monster films. You got The Host. You have, I haven't seen it, but Sector 7 has brought up a lot. The new Monstrum on Shudder. That's another film I could say that's definitely a kaiju.
Yeah, I've heard that's great.
Yeah, Victoria, do you have any thoughts on this?
I mean, it's specifically thinking still about Kong. Going back even to what Cole said, when you start where it's just kind of a large monster, it's kind of the evolution that more to me that makes Kong a kaiju than just a regular monster in a film. If you think about the scale, how even all the Godzilla films over time, how the scale of Godzilla has changed and mutated. Kong's gone through the same progression. When you go to the original film, you think of him relative to the size of the Empire State Building. He's large for his size, but is he monstrous the way we think of him later when we see him in King Kong versus Godzilla? And then, of course, you guys mentioned Kong Escapes. He's definitely kaiju sized. I think kaiju to me has a lot to do with scale as well. And then also, even if you think about the more modern versions that are not, if we're taking it outside of the context of Japan for the use of kaiju, if you think of the more modern Godzilla films that are joint processes, after, you think of the American only Godzilla, but when you think of the ones that are done jointly with Toho, when you see the newer Kong in Kong Skull Island, there's a very similar kind of evolution of scale again that we see through both of those, that's eventually hopefully leading to that kind of escalation of how big they are in relation to each other, which is important. But I think scale has a lot more to do with it to me, and also beyond just a large mutation of the same real animal, it's something that's kind of also got its own, not just personality, but it's got its own thought process. It's more raging war against, or being, battling other animals and other creatures. It's just kind of how it relates in its own story. It's its own story. It's the villain of the piece, right?
Yeah. And another point I want to do a roundtable on is whether or not the word is the idea of Western culture using the word to describe kaiju, because again, I feel like the best example is stuff like anime. You got obviously production made in Japan, but then you got shows that are heavily inspired by it, and yet they're kind of lumped in, like Avatar: The Last Airbender, or Ruby, or Boondocks example, and a lot of times they're lumped in as anime, and now anime is considered more of a stylistic choice of animation rather than just something just describe Japanese animation. I feel like that can be applied to kaiju, because you got Gorgo is heavily inspired by Godzilla, it's suitmation and miniatures, and you got works like Reptilicus from Denmark, or Yongari in South Korea, or Pulgasari in North Korea. Can kaiju be described as a style of filmmaking in a sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I think that when because I've been watching them so much, because stuck in quarantine, that there is a definite way that kaiju movies are filmed. And a lot of that is sort of the house Toho special effects style. That kind of has determined what that is. But like we've been saying, there's a focus on the personality of the monsters. They don't just pop up there. They when a plane hits them, they turn around and get angry. They don't just scream. There's a little bit more to it.
Faye, what's your thoughts on like whether or not like kaiju can be described more of a stylistic choice in making the monster film and the monster itself?
See, for me, at least back in the pre-Pacific Rim days, just because I've been in the fandom that long at this point, I feel like kaiju used to be more a subgenre of the giant monster genre, where it would refer specifically to Japanese giant monster films.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's how it used to be defined. Kind of like the way that anime is part of the medium of animation, but not everything in animation is technically anime, if that makes sense.
No, yeah, I totally agree. Victoria, your thoughts? Because I was thinking like, even like film genre, like when Faye brought up film genres, you got, like going back to horror, for example, giallo films, or like there's a style for giallo, like, but does it inherently have to be a Italian like murder mysteries to be considered giallo, or can it just be, a style of storytelling or a style of, filmmaking?
Well, when you leave, so speaking of giallos, because I mean, yeah, Italian films are definitely kind of my sweet spot. When you leave Italy, it's a thriller. It's definitely a genre that's defined by not just the style of storytelling and the elements the tropes you see within it, the place it comes from, and the time period it was made. Like it's to make a giallo now, it would have to be like this kind of revival of giallo, because giallo is kind of almost seen as something that is done. And kaiju, I think, for many years was thought of as a genre that was done. I mean, if you think there's these gaps of periods where they're at least they weren't coming to America, so we didn't see how much was happening overseas. But I would say generally, if you go by genre style, it's a point of origin does make a difference between if it's a kaiju or not. But it's a kaiju film can be made in another country, but it's like almost an homage. It's to kind of acknowledge that we're making a monster movie in the kaiju vein. Because you could even say, like you guys were discussing anime, manga is going through the same thing right now as well. Because manga, I remember when it was mangas from other countries started coming out, and it was this thing where, are they still considered manga if it's not Japanese comic books? Because otherwise, aren't they all just comic books? So
that is true.
It's a regionalization, right? That makes a genre sometimes.
Right.
No, yeah.
I was going to point out something I saw in the chat that I think is a really good point. Greg Fountain says the style of film is tokusatsu. Kaiju is a descriptor for the monster, because Godzilla fits under the blanket of, and kaiju films from Japan as a whole fits under the term tokusatsu. Yep. So kaiju applies to the monster, but it's still technically a tokusatsu film, because tokusatsu is basically just any Japanese film that heavily uses special effects. So I guess by that logic, it makes the terms even broader.
Yeah.
Yeah, like for tokusatsu, like for example, like I wouldn't consider like any of the Toho mutants. Like I don't consider like the H-Man, the kaiju. I wouldn't consider one of the mushroom people or the human vapor. Any of those would be kaiju. But I would consider Frankenstein from Frankenstein Conquers the World. He's definitely a kaiju, and it's just like he's fighting. He's fighting Baragon, and he's just giant, and that's really it. Like I think that with this definition, it's like not all giant monsters are kaiju, except when they are.
Yeah,
it's sort of how it is.
It is until it isn't.
You kind of know it when you see it.
That's kind of genre and subgenre anyway, right?
Yeah, it is. It is kind of like.
That's kind of the vibe we always wanted with Is This a Kaiju segment. We never ever intended it to start real arguments, just kind of a fun little discussion we put at the end of our episodes.
Because basically there's a whole debate of whether or not it's a kaiju basically started as a joke. I don't know who started, but people like, oh, is Clifford the Big Red Dog a kaiju, or is Big Bird a kaiju, or the Jolly Green Giant? But then like people actually start going into the debates about it, and sometimes it gets really heated. Because that's just how that's just internet,
everything gets heated and everything is blown out of proportion. And
you could just go on Twitter and say you like broccoli, and there'll be like someone on a verified Twitter account could come out and say they like broccoli, and there will be that one guy who's like, "Oh, I don't like broccoli. You're an idiot. How could you like broccoli?"
Yeah, and that's just people are hyperbolic on the internet, but it's like I actually this panel is a really good outlet for people diving into the genre as a way to just like discuss style of filmmaking, style of storytelling, style of culture as a whole. And I just honestly think this is a really good way of going about that. So we got 30 minutes. No, go ahead.
Can I point out somebody said in the chat that I like?
Sure, shoot.
Alex Malcolm says, "What about comics and Fin Fang Foom?" And I'll tell you, one of the things you can find it in different. They've reprinted these things in a lot of different ways, but there's one from the late '80s called Monster Masterpieces. That is the best collection of Marvel monster stories, and most of the art is by Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko.
Yes,
and I think it's probably the best kaiju stuff made in America of those Marvel monster comics, because they're definitely kaiju. Like there's no like a lot of them were made because kaiju films from the late 50s and early 60s were popular, so they were just kind of ripping them off because that's what Marvel and DC do. They just rip off other things in pop culture. That's fine.
Stan Lee even went as far as to work his way to get Godzilla into the Marvel universe.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And those comics are actually really good. Really good kind of funky, herb trippy art in them. They've gone out of print. They did have a big essential collection of them.
Yeah. I own it.
But they're actually pretty cheap to buy. Like you can find them for about $5 or $10 an issue, and it didn't last very long.
Yeah,
I love that the entire chat is now going crazy over Fin Fang Foom.
Yeah,
so many comments are just Fin Fang Foom.
Also, I want to bring up Fin Fang Foom.
He's a Sajin because isn't he from space?
Yeah, he's the thing. He looks like a dragon monster, but he is very intelligent. He is from space. He wears pants sometimes, depending on the artist.
Kaiju if you wear pants.
Yeah, well, Frankenstein wears a caveman skin.
That's not pants, and you know it.
He's wearing clothes. But you got it's Fin Fang Foom. I say he's more aligned with Baltan or a lot of the Ultraman aliens, Saiyans. And even going back with dragons, you got fantasy settings like Dungeons and Dragons or Lord of the Rings. Do dragons count as kaijus? Going back to mythology and stuff like that. Even Japanese mythology is Orochi considered a kaiju.
Well, I have a question with that. All right, because I was been trying to think about this. King Caesar from I think it's Godzilla versus Megalon, right?
Oh my boy,
Mechagodzilla.
I'm sorry, Mechagodzilla. I'm thinking of two movies at the same time. But so King Caesar, he's a god. He's a monster. He's a monster
protector,
of the god,
deity of Japan.
Right. So if
the Azumi tribe, the Azumi people.
Exactly. So if he can be a kaiju in that instance and also be a god or demon. Demon god, same platform, right? So how does that affect when you get to other mythologies?
Yeah. Or Ray Harryhausen's fantasy films, like Clash of Titans or stuff like his Sinbad films, you got the Cyclops, the dragon and stuff like that. And we'll do a roundtable on mythologies because these things don't exist, and ancient mythologies are basically the pop culture of the ancient times.
It's free idea buckets for writers.
Yeah,
no one's got copyright on Zeus yet.
Yeah.
I think that going back to what Victoria said, I think King Caesar is a kaiju, and I think a lot of that is because he's in a Godzilla movie, he's helping Godzilla fight this Mechagodzilla. So. Right. He just has to be a kaiju. He just is. He's a guy in a suit, but I would say that I'm a little less inclined to call other mythological beasts kaiju. I don't think of just to go back to Ray Harryhausen. I would think of Ymir from 20,000 Miles to Earth. I think that is. I think he is kind of like a kaiju. But I don't know if I would think of the Hydra from Jason and the Argonauts or Talos, the big bronze guy, either. I don't know if I would think of them as kaiju.
See, I feel like in regards to dragons specifically, you have to kind of make a character around them. Like we have King Ghidorah, and King Ghidorah is obviously a dragon, but King Ghidorah is not just a regular dragon. He's a dragon from space, and he's much bigger than dragons tend to be.
Yeah, and I agree. And I remember when we did an episode on Smaug, our producer Anthony brought up a good point. It also just depends on the world. Like Dungeons and Dragons. Dragons are a common occurrence, so they're not really kaiju. They're just more of a common threat compared to something like the Tarrasque, which is it only exists one time. It is a unique thing amongst themselves. And you got films like Reign of Fire. Dragons just suddenly appear. And you got Manda from Toho, another example, which is just basically a Eastern style dragon creature, or snake or whatever. And that's very interesting. Or Orochi the Eight-Headed Dragon. Basically what I describe as Japan's equivalence to Clash of Titans. Using a more like hyper stylized version of its mythology, which is like, does that consider a kaiju? When we saw Orochi at the end and the other creatures they encounter in that film, or a Daimajin.
Oh yeah, Daimajin is a big one to discuss.
One thing. I'll tell you, one dragon thing that actually did sort of film them like kaiju is the episode. What was it? Third to last episode of Game of Thrones, or whatever it was, when Daenerys and her dragon burned down the city. That to me had like way more like kaiju vibes to it than a lot of other sort of depictions of dragon.
I think Jake brings up a good point. Like, a lot of the things when it comes to identifying a kaiju, it does kind of have like a vibe to it. Most times when you think of some of the most famous kaiju movies, like the original Gojira, the monster itself is both a character and a metaphor, usually for some kind of thing that the director or the writers want to commentate on. Like Godzilla, obviously, in the first Gojira, was meant to be a commentary on nuclear war and nuclear destruction. And you could make all sorts of arguments of what the monsters are meant to represent. Guillermo del Toro was very unsubtle about what the kaiju meant in terms of harming the environment in Pacific Rim. So, like, I feel you really do have to see that vibe. Like, is this a kaiju? It's all, you kind of get the idea of, like, is it following in the footsteps of that kind of filmmaking?
And not to say that every kaiju has to be a metaphor, but there is just this weird way of making the kaiju a full-on character. Like when you brought up, like, the Universal monster, giant monster movies, like the Deadly Mantis and the Tarantula, they're non-characters. They're just an obstacle. But Godzilla's a character. Kong's a character. The kaiju in Pacific Rim, they're obstacles, but they're unique in their own way. And the Ultra Kaiju, especially, they each are their own character and are reoccurring. People love, Gomorrah and Ella King and Baltan and Pigmon. They're so unique in their own way, and they are characters. They're not just the monster. You can actually, and even with Legendary's films, King of the Monsters made sure Godzilla, Mothra, Rodan, and King Ghidorah are filmed in a way where they have personalities. They think and they emote and all that stuff. So do you feel like character is another way to describe a kaiju, is like a more in-depth version of a monster? Because that feels like a way the genre has been portrayed.
See, I wonder about that with Smaug, because so there's many ways in the because I'm thinking different interpretations of Smaug where he is filmed or shown in that kind of grand kaiju style, but at the same time, and okay, he's also like a metaphor, you could say, for human greed, but is he too articulate? Is the fact that he's not just a sentient being, but he also can articulate? Right. Does that make him beyond kaiju, like where he, or maybe outside of the range of kaiju, because he can have a conversation with Bilbo?
Yeah, see, for me personally, because I was thinking about this, if a kaiju, or what's quote unquote, if something can talk, I wouldn't consider it a kaiju per se. I feel like a kaiju cannot speak, because that's part of the point of kaiju, is that they're more like animals than anything else. So once it starts talking, I think that kind of invalidates it from being a kaiju.
I'm kind of iffy on that,
because
I'd say, like, I'm usually, if it's intelligent enough to speak or do certain things, like, I think like Kong is smart enough to use weapons in Skull Island, where he uses that rotor on a chain, and he like whips all the branches off a tree and uses it like a bat. See, I think like that's where it like they can definitely be that level of intelligence, but talking is an issue. But I think if it's very simple, kind of like just a few words, kind of like Hulk speak, like me crush tiny thing.
But what about?
I think if it's simple enough like that, it can still have that bestial kind of appearance and action. So I think as long as it's very simplistic in mind, I think it can still count as a kaiju.
But what about creatures like Zigra from Gamera vs. Zigra? When we first meet him, he's straight up talking. He is communicating. Or creatures with telepathy. You know, what about? Or like someone brought it as a joke, but there's the infamous scene in Godzilla vs. Gigan where they're talking. Or
right.
But
they're talking to each other, talking monster, right?
I actually kind of agree with Faye here, and it's not really any, and to me, it's more of like a stylistic thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If I see this monster just kind of verbalizing and talking, it just doesn't seem like a kaiju to me. Whereas like Jet Jaguar giving a thumbs up, or Godzilla and you know, when they have the big conversation, when the big three have the big talk, and Ghidorah the three-headed monster, and Mothra is like, you know, they're cussing at Mothra. Exactly. Like, to me, that if they were just talking, that would just feel a little bit off.
Lisa pointed out, what about Minya in Godzilla's Revenge?
Godzilla says I need to fight my own.
Does that even count? Because that's more of an imaginary version.
Yeah,
it's not really.
Imaginary friend version. That's all Kenny kid.
Just to go back to vs. Gigan though, even then in the original Japanese version, they never actually talk. They have speech bubbles that are kind of there to let you know, like, what they're thinking.
You're now witnessing this in Kaiju vision.
Yeah. I haven't read the comic, but someone pointed out if you guys read Kaiju Max, the Kaiju flat out speak in that comic book, and that's definitely interesting. Or even Power Ranger villains, like they start out as Kaijin, but we all know the formula of Power Rangers and Super Sentai, they grow. So are they still Kaijin, or do they become Kaiju, or can we describe it as Daikaijins? Same, or someone's talking about the Ultra series, but they're more like they're Saiyans, honestly.
Yeah, I wouldn't consider the Ultras Kaiju personally. I think they're more superheroes that are just big.
Yeah. Also, Maleficing brings up a good point. I think Minya is discredited because it's a dream.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It was all a dream.
Dreams. But and I've been seeing as well as at the end of the day, this is kind of like a eye of the beholder thing, because words and terms are weird. You know, people have, and it's also kind of like it's very subjective. And hi, Rocha, by the way.
Rocha's in the chat.
Yeah, but and it's very subjective. It's very interesting, but it leads credence to just the idea of just, you know, it goes. It's not just like, you know, is like we all know what a movie is, we all know what a video game is, but when you have genres and stuff, you know, stuff bleeds in and it opens ideas, and you know, it is inspired. You know, like, you know, Guillermo del Toro is heavily inspired by Tokusatsu and Kaiju, and we were given Pacific Rim, and you know, you got a lot of other films that are just like love letters and tributes. It's like Colossal, which is fantastic. You got The Host, which is like Bong Joon-ho is the host, like, or Cloverfield. The original Cloverfield was originally designed to be like, oh, let's give America their own kaiju film, even though we have King Kong, or the Nemesis books, Jeremy Robinson's Nemesis books, which are another supposed to be like America's answer to the kaiju genre. And
I feel dumb now because I saw somebody bring up Nemesis in the chat, and I completely blanked on those books for a moment, and I thought they were talking about Nemesis from Resident Evil.
Yeah, but and you know, they're still debating them in the chat, and you know, and I appreciate you guys talking, and it is a good discussion, and I love discussions that are open. You know, it generations of, you know, youth like will continue talking about this genre, and it just shows just how much we care and how much a lot of stuff we kind of like love, like, most Kaiju fans are dinosaur lovers. Most Kaiju fans also love, stuff from the 50s, like the Deadly Mantis and Gorgo and the Giant Claw. It just shows like there is a universal love of just big monsters or just monsters in general. Like, the whole, scene from Thor Ragnarok, big monster.
So, but see, though, I think the only giant monster that is definitively a kaiju is Clifford. That's the only one. Clifford. Everyone else is fake.
Clifford is the true monster of us all.
You know what, Mateo? I love dinosaurs. You get the gold sticker for most wholesome content. I like dinosaurs too.
Yeah, they're great.
Yeah. So thank you guys for coming to this panel. So we should do like a quick rapid fire, like, is this a kaiju? And we're not going to debate, just let's go. So Stay-Puff, kaiju, yes or no?
Yes.
No. He's a dude in a suit.
Nobody steps on a church in my town.
Jolly Green Giant.
No.
No.
He can talk, can he?
Yeah.
Oh.
All right. Galactus.
No, he's intelligent.
Yeah.
He's a Saiyan.
He's like super smart.
Yeah.
He's like he's an Ultraman villain. Yeah.
Yeah.
Here you go.
Yeah.
Let's have the Ultra King versus Galactus.
Legendary Pokemon.
Depends on which one.
No.
Like
Scale.
no.
They're little, right?
They're too small.
Yeah.
No, there are some Pokemon that are well over 40 feet in length.
Oh yeah, still.
Groudon's huge, Kyogre's huge, Eternatus from Sword and Shield is
Eternatus
like 80 feet long.
Yeah, and then that's including the Gigantamax Pokemon. Do they count?
Yeah, because they are strange creatures. We got Pokemon that are giant sentient ice cream cones.
Yeah.
Yes. Weird.
Is Gigantamax Wailord beyond kaiju?
And the only ones that can talk are really intelligent psychic types, so I guess they get discluded. And Meowth.
Yeah.
All right.
So thank you guys for joining this panel. Be sure to check out the other panels here on Kaiju Online, and be sure to check out Gargantucast. We are a bi-weekly podcast where we dive into kaiju, tokusatsu, mecha, and monster movies in humorous but insightful ways. You can meet me and Cole every bi-week. And
what about Mongo from Shrek?
That's a good one. And we'll close out. Just find where we are. We can find our podcast wherever you get podcasts and our writings on Something Ghoulish. Faye, where can people find your awesome work?
Mainly at Something Ghoulish. I am going to start for our culture soon, though, I promise.
Awesome. Jake, where can people find your fantastic work?
You can find all of my genre writing is going to be at somethingghoulish.com. You can also follow me on Twitter at the Aquaslug, and where I post about horror and giant monsters and little monsters and all that type of stuff.
And Victoria.
You can find my writings on somethingghoulish.com. You can find my show, The Horror Academic, over on YouTube, and you can follow me on Twitter at 077.
I guess I should plug my Twitter.
Yeah,
you can find me at Fairyzilla.
Yeah, and you can find Gargantucast. We have our own Twitter, and I'm Chris Kaiju on Twitter,
and I'm the McGrisson.
So we're glad to kick off day 2 of Kaiju Online, and happy to be part of this.
Thank you, Rocha.
Oh, yeah. So hope to see you guys soon. Be sure to listen to our next show. We actually have a new episode tomorrow, so stay tuned. So
love you guys in the chat. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, chat.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Really cool comments.
Yeah.
I wish I could have got to more of those questions.
I know, me too. Oh, goodness.
We need like a whole nother hour. Yeah.
Oh, I would love to. Somebody brought up, I wish I remembered their name. Somebody brought up, when does a mecha count as a kaiju?
Like Mecha Godzilla or
because of like Godzilla's bones in it. We could talk about this shit for hours.
Yeah.
Man-made a kaiju. Who knows?
Right at the end, I hit the.
He was doing so good.
I failed you.
All right. Yeah. So guess we'll wait and see. By the way, if you guys want to know where we find our podcast, we're on YouTube, but YouTube is a problem. So you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, wherever you. If you got music, we'll probably find a podcast there.
And you can also at somethingghoulish.com.
Yes, so somethingghoulish.com. We have a directory for where you can find all of our shows. So awesome. All right, how do we?
Solid 50 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
we're still on.
Yep.
We're still on.
If you want to see a good American kaiju movie, watch Tammy and the T-Rex on Shudder.
Yes, Tammy and the T-Rex.
Oh, that movie's a trip.
Oh my
god.
And
make it a Denise Richardson kaiju double feature and watch Starship Troopers with it.
We just watched Starship Troopers.
Just finished.
Two great films about the American dream.
Stream.
Yeah. Yeah, we just finished Starship Troopers. Is Max from Cats Don't Dance a Kaiju?
He teleports. He's clearly not human.
And does size shifting count if a character is just animated in a way where they keep growing and shrinking? But yeah, also
is Parallax from the Ryan Reynolds Green Lantern movie a kaiju?
Is the Evangelion kaiju?
In the Green Lantern comics, all the different lanterns, they have the different kind of spirits, and they're all kind of like kaiju. Like the blue one is like a big fish. The Butcher, from the Red Lanterns.
The Predator for Love, which is
creepy.
Head scratching. Jeff Johns was up with that.
I love that. I love that stuff. That's the coolest thing he did in that book.
Oh, I'm
Red Lantern
fan.
Yeah, Red Lanterns is one of my favorite comics from the New 52. One of the only good ones.
I got a bunch of rings on my desk here.
Cole's showing his nerd cred.
Camera, work with me. Ta-da!
The angels from Evangelion are totally kaiju.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
they are organic. They're covered in metal, but they are organic.
Yep. Not to mention how Anno
gotta put on my rings.
References some I've been binging through Return of Ultraman. I'm just like, oh, so that's where Anno got that. That's where Anno got that. That's where Anno got that.
Well, is he the one? I've watched a little bit of. I'm pretty anime ignorant, and I've seen a little bit of Evangelion. Didn't some of those guys on that work on some of the Heisei Gamera movies?
Shinji Higuchi was the head of special effects for the Heisei Gamera films, and Anno and Shinji Higuchi were jumped on for Shin Godzilla, and there will be jumping.
I knew about Shin Godzilla and Shin Ultraman, but I looked somebody up and then I saw that they worked on the 90s Gamera movie.
Shinji Higuchi was part of the founding members of Gainax.
Yeah.
Yes. I always thought about Gainax.
However you want to say it. Anyways, we're gonna wrap up now.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you guys for having us.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
All right, wrapping up, guys. Glad we had our post panel stuff. So bye-bye, guys.
Bye-bye.